Senang sekali. Ini terlihat yang sudah hadir ada lebih dari 500 peserta, jadi ada 539, sekarang 540. Dan pagi ini tentunya kesempatan yang luar biasa. Kita hadir dua narasumber dengan level internasional yang tentunya harapannya bisa menambahkan banyak wawasan kepada kita dan juga strategi-strategi baru yang mungkin bisa kita implementasikan. Dan sebagai pengantar, sebagaimana tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Jalu dalam sambutannya, kegiatan hari ini adalah bagian dari program OCSEA, yaitu program yang didukung oleh UNICEF Indonesia untuk melakukan upaya-upaya pencegahan dan penanganan kekerasan seksual dan eksploitasi seksual di ranah daring kepada anak. Dan program ini sudah dimulai dari tahun 2023 dan tahun ini adalah tahun terakhir. Selama 2 tahun berlalu, selain kajian data dasar yang tadi sudah disebutkan beberapa hasilnya oleh Pak Jalu, juga disusun berbagai modul. Jadi ada beberapa modul untuk peningkatan kapasitas dari setiap kelompok masyarakat yang berbeda untuk bagaimana melakukan pencegahan eksploitasi dan kekerasan seksual di ranah daring. Mulai modul yang dikhususkan untuk anak, kemudian dikhususkan untuk orang tua, dan juga modul yang dikhususkan untuk lembaga-lembaga penyedia layanan. Nah, karena ini adalah program yang didukung oleh UNICEF, di tahun 2024 berbagai modul tadi dan juga mekanisme penanganan serta berbagai upaya diuji cobakan atau dipilotkan, dilakukan di 3 wilayah di Indonesia, yaitu ada di Provinsi Sulawesi Selatan, Jawa Tengah, dan Jawa Timur, di beberapa desa dan kelurahan sebagai yang terpilih gitu ya, untuk bisa mendukung strategi di desa-desa dan kelurahan tersebut untuk mewujudkan desa dan kelurahan yang layak anak, khususnya mengembangkan lingkungan yang aman dan aman bagi anak dari berbagai bentuk kekerasan yang selama ini sudah existing dijalankan oleh pemerintah daerah masing-masing dan ditambahkan dengan aspek perlindungan anak di ranah daring. Yang ini tadi persoalan-persoalan, ancaman-ancamannya juga telah disampaikan oleh Pak Jalu banyak sekali. Dan tahun ini juga sebagai bagian dari exit strategi program OCSEA ini, Bapak Ibu, Kementerian PPPA juga meminta bantuan UNICEF untuk dapat mendokumentasikan praktek-praktek baik dari pelaksanaan berbagai program pencegahan dan penanganan OCSEA di tingkat desa dan kelurahan, tingkat kabupaten dan kota, hingga tingkat provinsi, yang nantinya kami harapkan bisa menjadi referensi bagi Bapak Ibu semua dari seluruh provinsi di Indonesia dan juga berbagai lembaga yang bekerja untuk memberikan pemenuhan hak anak dan perlindungan khusus dapat mendapatkan ide-ide baru, bahkan mungkin ide-ide pengembangan. Dan proses pendokumentasian ini sudah berjalan seminggu ke belakang. Kebetulan saya juga bergabung dengan tim Ibu Karen dan Karen untuk melakukan pendokumentasian di 3 provinsi yang tadi saya sebutkan. Banyak praktek-praktek baik termasuk yang saya temukan, tetapi kita akan mendapatkan perspektif dari orang yang di luar Indonesia yang punya juga wawasan internasional dan juga memiliki pengalaman di berbagai negara di Indonesia. Selain di lingkungan negara-negara ASEAN, juga di negara-negara lain yang banyak mereka dampingi. Dan saya yakin Bapak Ibu nanti akan merasa berbangga karena di kesempatan di dua provinsi yang saya ikutin kemarin, beliau berdua menyampaikan bahwa Indonesia hebat dibandingkan dengan negara-negara lain yang sudah beliau kunjungi. Nah, ini kesempatan yang baik, kita akan dengarkan praktek-praktek baik dan pembelajaran yang dicatat oleh beliau berdua dengan perspektif globalnya sebagai masukan untuk kita semua. Nah, dengan bangga maka kami akan mengundang Ibu Karen dan Ibu Karen untuk bisa dipin juga ya untuk kedua narasumber. Okay. Hello, Karen and Karen. How are you? It's still mute. Okay. How are you doing this morning? Okay. So I will give the floor to you, Karen and Karen, who will be speaking next. First, just up to you. So please feel free. First you got 30 minutes to share your findings, the lesson learned, and all the points that you want to share with us. No. Okay, please, I give the floor for you.
Good morning, and thank you very much to all of you for participating in this event and for giving us the opportunity to share some of our knowledge with you about really the journey that's been taken in understanding the concept of OCSEA, not just from an Indonesian perspective, but from a global perspective. So the method that we are using today is a little bit broader than just looking at the good practices that we've identified as part of our focus group discussions and interviews. What we would like to do is really give you a much deeper understanding of why this issue is important and why particularly adolescents are grappling with the issue of their online interaction and what safety measures have been put in place and why those safety measures are necessary. So we're going to take you through the lens of the adolescent very quickly, just understanding them perhaps a little bit deeper and from a digital perspective. And then we're going to have a look at the necessary legislative frameworks that have been put in place for countries to look at in terms of creating their own safeguarding mechanisms. And then we will look finally at some other examples across the globe of best or good practices. And then I will end off with some of the things that we've identified as part of our in-country visit over the last couple of days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. What screen is that? Let's try again. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Use the topic. Okay, we our time has been drastically reduced. So I'm going to have to march through these slides and leave out a few and hop around just to make sure that we cover as much as we can. The most important thing really when we're talking about anything digital, anything online, is understanding how adolescents perceive the whole process. Because if we develop programs, if we develop responses, they're not going to be effective unless they actually address adolescent concerns. So that is why an understanding of adolescent development is really, really important in terms of being able to have an effective response. So in order to understand the online activity of the child, we need to understand the child. Sorry, just give us a second.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, basically.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, hope that's better. Okay, so in order to understand the way children behave online, we need to understand the child, because otherwise we can become very judgmental about why children behave the way they do, simply because we don't understand the background. So I'm going to do a very brief overview of why this is important. Now, I'm going to focus on adolescents, and the reason for that is that children under the age of 12, under puberty, should not actually be online unaccompanied. There is no developmental need for that. And this is quite an important issue, because from the research in Indonesia, the baseline, we discovered that a vast number of children under the age of 12 are online alone, even from the age of 2 and 3. Where parents have left the children to play games, to do movies online without being accompanied. So below this age, there is no real need for children to be online unaccompanied, because from a developmental perspective, they don't really need it. The most important thing to understand is that teenagers love the internet. It's an important part of their life, and there's a number of reasons for this. You know, we've gone quite wide in the spectrum. When we initially started with OCSEA, the message was children should be offline. Children shouldn't be online.
It's
protect them
dangerous.
from online. It's dangerous. We've had to move away from that perspective, because it's not accurate, and it can affect children developmentally, as I will explain. Now, if we look very quickly at child development, your adolescent is cognitively moving to what is known as a more formal operational stage, which gives them the capacity to think about things, to question things. They want to know why things behave in particular ways. They want to be involved. And we see this very much in the whole OCSEA program in Indonesia. Your children's forums, your Jagabarang, your programs, children are interested. They're going online, they're reading the materials, they're watching the videos, they're watching the TikToks. They're interested in the questions, they have questions. So that whole formal operational stage is very important in understanding the reaction of children. And then if we look at the socio-emotional stages of development, and I've put a diagram there to show them, the two most important ones that I've highlighted there are identity versus identity diffusion, and intimacy and isolation. Those two are key to understanding children, both offline and online now. And when we look at these stages, we will see that your adolescent is going through an identity stage in terms of trying to discover who they are. Up until adolescence, we're very much a product of our family, our parents. They tell us what to do, what to think, where to go, and control all our activities. But as we progress into adolescence, we need to become independent. We need to discover who we are. So in this stage, I'm trying to discover to what group I belong. What are my values? Am I a sports person? What are my interests? I need to find my space in life. And this is offline as just normal childhood development. So what do? I experiment in terms of trying to find out if I am trying to find out if I have interests and where I belong to. Lots of at this stage looking for heroes and role models. And that's also very important in terms of how we look at the program, because the Children's Forum has been very good in providing this kind of role model, hero worship for your child. A lot of the children want to be part of those forums, part of the activity, part of all the programs that are being developed. So it fits very much into so it fits very much into the way children develop.
How do we move to the next slide?
Sorry, guys, more technical difficulties. This one, that's one. Okay. Okay. The other big stage that your children are going through is your intimacy versus isolation stage. This is where I'm learning about relationships. It starts off with friendships, best friends. What does friendship mean? Loyalty, support. You don't betray each other. You're there for one another. And then that develops into relationships. We learn this from our families, from our communities, from our media, in terms of what relationships are. And the whole idea is that by the end of the stage, we will have a good understanding of what it means to be a friend, to be kind, and to then move into a formal relationship with a partner and have a good relationship. We always know that our adolescent behavior is can often drive us a little bit crazy, because they're going through a lot during adolescence. Puberty means hormonal changes, and that has a huge impact on children. It has an impact on brain development. It has an impact on their emotional state. So we often find that they're very impulsive, very volatile. They tend to act without thinking and have very low ability for self-control in this stage. Also, lots of risk-taking. We all know that our teenagers do really silly things. You know, they'll steal a parent's bike or a car, and without realizing what the serious consequences of this are. I'll just make it again. There we go.
Yeah.
Now I need to move on.
How do we? It's not moving that one. No, it's yeah. Yep. Okay.
Where are you moving them?
On there.
Which one? Yeah.
Your
That one. Okay. Okay. In terms of brain development, what's really important also just to be aware of, and I am going through this very quickly, I know, but during adolescence, there are major changes in the brain. And this has a huge impact on children's behavior. So if I show you just very quickly a picture of the brain, you will see in the first picture, the brain is a 5-year-old brain. And if you look at the colors, very similar to your preteen brain. So there's not a lot of development that happens between 5 and 11 till we hit about puberty. But if you look then at the teen brain, the big difference that happens between 11, 12, and 20 is huge. That's when most of the brain develops. And that has a huge impact on your adolescent. It means that the frontal lobe, the one where we think about, the one where we understand risks, where we evaluate, that's the last part to develop. And the part of the brain that controls emotions, the amygdala, is at its most active during this period. So your teenagers are very emotional and they can't reason like adults. So that's your background in terms of changes to the brain. It means that our children don't really have full capacity to make rational and responsible decisions. They don't evaluate risks, and that is why they will do things like send naked photographs of themselves, why they will send intimate photographs, because they can't work out the consequences of what this would do. So it makes them very vulnerable in terms of their capacity to evaluate and to think things through. They'll send messages before they think about it. They'll upload videos before they think about it. And that's normal adolescent behavior, unfortunately. So how do we link this to online? As we know, our children do not grow up in a vacuum. They grow up in a community. Before, it used to be an offline community. That has now changed. Our children are now growing up online, and development has moved. Those two stages of development that I've just referred to have moved online. So your child's socio-emotional development is now taking place online, whether we like that or not. And that is the reason why online has become so important for them and why we can't remove it from them, because their development is happening online. They are able now to make their friendships online, which is their one stage. They're also able to create their statuses. Who am I? Where do I fit in? So that whole form of development is now going online. And that explains why children love online so much, because it's the venue where they are growing and developing in terms of all respects. So it explains why, even in the baseline research, 99.9% of children were online, because this is where their development is happening. Let's look at this whole issue of developing an identity. When we look at online, constructing their sexual identity online, what we see of how they're developing their profiles will depend on their interests. So your sports children will have videos about what they're doing in their sport, whether it's soccer or horse riding. They'll upload their videos. They'll do all of those kinds of things. Others will share information related to what they're interested in, whether it's makeup, whatever it may be. But at the same time, because we're developing a sense of identity, a sense of sexuality, and society is telling us that we need to look sexy at a particular age, children often feel the need to be seen to be sexy. And we see this in the names they choose online, the photos they upload, and the avatars that they use. Sexting, one of the other issues that we find, again, explaining that from a developmental aspect. As we said, this is a stage where children are developing intimacy. They are beginning to find relationships and end up with partners. So obviously, we are going to have this romance happening online. We're going to be texting each other. We're going to be talking. We're going to be communicating. It's going to be flirting. It's going to move into sexualized talk. This is stuff that before a lot of kids would have been doing offline. They're now simply doing it online, where it's unfortunately exposing them to risks, because that information can be shared. That information is no longer safe. If we did it offline, we wouldn't have any proof of it.
Sorry, just give us a second. There's apparently an issue with the translation. Please just give us a second. Apparently there is an issue with translation. Yeah, just send
Do you
it.
think we ask others follow the translation?
Can you do that? Because they're gonna respond in Indonesia.
Apakah ada?
Sudah.
Okay, hope that's sorted out. So that's why in the baseline as well, we found that so many of the children were online. 99.4% of the children use the internet, and 89% use it every day for more than 5 hours. And nearly every child in Indonesia uses the internet, and most of them for a number of hours every day, because this is the environment, that this is where they are
Developing. That's not
developing.
Sorry. Help. I said help. Is it better? I don't know how to get this. I can try it now. Yeah,
There we go, it just stop sometimes. So children not only are online, but they love online. And what the baseline showed us was that these children have a million reasons why they love the internet, from the fact that they can make friends, that they can talk to their friends, that they can watch movies, they can be entertained, they can find information. It's their world. And one of the children in the baseline made a statement that I always remember. And he said, I have the world in my hands, which is exactly what the internet represents for children. They see it as a place where, a happy space, where they can interact with people that they find important. Because, as we just said earlier, that children are looking for friends, they're developing friendships as an intimacy stage in development. What we find online, 81% of the children were looking for friends online. It's a normal developmental stage. They want to have lots of friends, they want to talk. They love to talk, they love to watch videos, they love to do schoolwork. And all of these developmental stages are happening online. Unfortunately, also what we have found was that there was certain amounts of harassment. Children did receive sexual images on their phone. A vast majority of the children were exposed to pornography that popped up on their screen, didn't even look for pornography. And that in itself is very dangerous, because a number of the children told us that they had never sought pornography. It had popped up on their screen, they'd watched it, and they'd found it interesting, so went to look for more. So that's a very big danger area for children, is this unwittingly being exposed to pornography. Very few of the children actually went out and sought pornography on their own for no reason. Children received requests for photographs from strangers, from their own friends, and invitations to meet offline. Many children did meet offline, and had meetings with people for which the parents did not have a problem, because obviously parents had not been informed as well. Some of the children said their parents didn't even ask them questions about the meetings. Very few parents actually were involved and asked questions about the meeting. Children also, especially towards the earlier ages, early puberty, 13, 14, 15, have a very, and again, it goes back to brain development, believe that they're safe on the internet because nothing has happened to them. The whole egocentric approach. Nothing has happened to them, so therefore they're perfectly fine and they're perfectly safe. So they have a very skewed concept of what safety is. Many of them said that they were safe because they had a password on their phone. So they obviously didn't have knowledge of what the risks were online, which is why the OCSEA program was so good because it provided that knowledge of risks. And in the interviews that we conducted in the past week, many of the children said to us that before the OCSEA program, they had no knowledge of what the risks were online. So that's a very important part of what the program has achieved. Just wanting to move a bit faster so that we can move on. Another issue that we had was that parents in the baseline had very little knowledge about monitoring their children. Many would say that they did monitor their children, but when they were questioned about what and how they monitored, they would say things like, oh, I will walk past the computer every half an hour or so. But when we interviewed the children, they said that when their parents came into a room, they'd change the screen. So the monitoring wasn't very effective and parents didn't really know what to monitor. So what we found again in the interviews this week was the knowledge that parents now had, and even grandparents, of how to monitor. Some of the village facilitators were mentioning the fact that grandparents contacted them to ask how they could check history on a phone. So that knowledge is being disseminated to the parents and grandparents, the older generation. What is important as well that came out of the research is the fact that children are able to protect themselves online if given the information. They know, once they know how to block, once they know how to delete, once they know how to report, they do have the capacity to protect themselves and are willing to protect themselves, because obviously they don't want their images shared or any of their messages to be shared. So that's a very important aspect which the OCSEA program fulfilled, was in terms of providing children with the knowledge of how to protect them online, as opposed to the earlier ideas of remove them from the online behavior. We do know that our children have online sexual experiences. Again, looking back at development, this is the stage where sexual development is taking place. From the baseline, that was very interesting was that most of the sexual experiences, the majority, were amongst the older children, the children closer to 18. But again, it was a lot of children receiving sexual messages. So about a quarter of the children in the baseline had received sexual messages, and 34 children had been asked for sexual information about themselves, mostly by strangers, but also by friends, because this is part of the sexting, the sharing the information. So a lot of the sexual stuff was happening between peers. The sexual stuff from strangers was very much limited. Not that that makes it safe, because we also know that many of the peers were sharing the information with others. So the dangers are still there. Interesting responses to children's response to pornography was that the majority of them were not disturbed by the pornography. They simply said that they blocked it, or they moved on, or they just didn't give it much notice, which is the majority of the children. But again, as I said, a few of the children did open it, did look at it. So it's the small group, the vulnerable group that may be vulnerable for other reasons, who require more protection in this respect. Moving on, sorry, our 3 hours has gone down to half an hour. Cyberbullying came out as quite a huge problem in Indonesia, bigger than the sexual issues. And we've been focusing a lot on sexual exploitation. But I think a big learning from this baseline was that a lot more needs to be done about the cyberbullying, because that's the major issue for children online. Children were very keen for information to be provided for them, and they requested in the baseline study that this information should be presented as part of school curriculum. And in our interviews in the last week, we're finding that many of the schools are introducing this information, and the children are finding it very useful and are very happy about receiving it and are actually spreading it amongst their peers. They also gave us topics specifically, and interestingly, the topics also related not just to protection, but to support, because they were asking for things like, how do they prevent becoming addicted to gaming, online gaming? And how could they, what were the ethics of online gaming? So there were other requests as well that were quite interesting that came from the children. Just to go very briefly through the online safety risks, and I have summarized them there. Obviously, there's the privacy issues, accessing their private information, online solicitation where they've sent invitations, adolescent prostitution. The online is obviously a very good venue for accessing clients for online for adolescent prostitution. Cyberbullying, exposure to problematic content, which doesn't get too much attention because we're so busy with all the other issues, but children's exposure to violence and hate speech and also has quite a huge impact on children. And then, of course, our bright new one, the artificial intelligence or AI, which I think is going to be an even bigger problem for us than what has gone before. So if we look at these issues, your digital privacy, as we know, children are sending private messages, and they're not necessarily sexual messages. Sometimes children open up to friends and talk about the fact that there's domestic violence in their home, or that they have problems studying, or they're dyslexic, or whatever it could be. And then this information gets shared amongst peers in the classroom, which again amounts to cyberbullying, but it also is a privacy issue in that a lot of their privacy is invaded. The sharing of their images with others as well. As I said, online solicitation, grooming. Grooming is so much easier online and so much more successful because I can be very supportive. You don't really see me. I can pretend to be somebody else. Whereas face to face, it's a bit, you see who I am. So it's easier for online solicitation. And in many of the stories that we heard in the past week, they've all begun with online solicitation, with grooming of the children. As I said, adult prostitution, criminal gangs often use online to recruit girls and to advertise girls. Cyberbullying, our face-to-face bullying, which has always been there, has now moved online. So it's just got worse because your face-to-face bullying is small. You're bullied in a class, 1 or 2 people may see it. Online bullying, hundreds of people see it. So the access is there. Also, what makes it so much worse is that face-to-face bullying, I can get away from it and go home because I leave the bully at school or wherever he is. Online, he follows me home. He follows me everywhere I am. So it's much more intense and has a much more traumatic impact on children. And then, of course, as I said, exposure to problematic content. Violence is problematic. The pornography, there's lots of research on children's exposure to pornography. At the wrong developmental age, it has a huge impact. It gives children the wrong concepts of what sex and what sex in a relationship involves. Especially when children start looking at violent pornography, that leads to sex offending. So there's a huge amount of problems with pornography, which is why businesses and service providers are a big area of having to try and prevent that children's access to pornography. Hate speech, self-harm. There are websites that show children how they can self-harm There are websites that give children advice on anorexia and how to do it and how not to be seen, and bulimia. So a lot of those. And if we go back to brain development, where our children really don't have the concept to evaluate, to see consequences, these sites can become very, very harmful. And then the last one, of course, second last one is the online gaming. Now, online gaming is wonderful and children adore it, as do many adults, but it has become a venue for predators because we become friends in the game, we become allies, we work together, we play together, we start chatting. And it's been a big venue for sexual exploitation and a big venue for cyberbullying as well. Fraud, as we know, is a problem for children and one that they highlighted quite a lot in the baseline studies, being exposed to scams, losing money, and then our AI, which is our new one. So now we have a new one. We used to have child sexual abuse material. Now we have AI child sexual abuse material, which is material that has been created or generated using AI. And then we have another term that is used is deep fake. Again, this term is used differently in the media. It sometimes refers to all AI generated content, but others use it to content that is based on a real image or video and then has been altered using AI technology. So it's a little bit of confusion between the use of those terms. But if we look at it, what we're using here are basically AI algorithms that create lifelike, but either completely fabricated content involving minors. So I create the children from nothing, and it looks very real, very difficult to identify what is almost impossible sometimes to identify what is real and what is not. And then we also have one where they take pictures of real children and then change those pictures and adapt them, change faces, take the clothes off, which is one of the issues, is the nudifying one. AI online grooming is another problem because they use algorithms to identify potential victims much more effectively. So I can, using the algorithms, I can see what you're looking at. So I can see you're watching a lot of horse riding videos. So I can chat to you about horse riding videos. It makes it easier to groom. I can see what you're watching. So I can then chat to you more. I can see what you're interested in. And also, AI grooming means I can alter my image so that when you see me, you don't see the real me, which makes it almost impossible for children to realize they're talking to an adult or who they're talking to. And your predators can customize their interactions to be much more convincing and manipulative. So your deep fakes, as I said, those are where we create completely fake content, but real content, completely fake content about something that looks very real, where we make up videos, where we make up images, and it's particularly convincing, as I mentioned. So these can be used as a tool for grooming, as I explained, and I just wanted to show you. We did this little experiment. It's just a photograph of my daughter, and I got her in 2 seconds using AI to change the images. So she changed her image, as you can see in the first one, to a boy. So that's her as a boy. I could use that image then to groom other girls beautifully. It's so easy. Then we changed the image to make her put on weight, so she was bigger, just to show you how we can manipulate images. Then we took her image, because obviously we didn't want to do a nude image. We took her face and we added a different body and hair. It's just so easy. It took us 3 seconds to create these images. And that's where the danger comes, because I have your photograph, I can put it on a nude body and I can share it with everybody. And that body looks very real, but it's not real. And, you know, how would I ever be able to prove that that's not me and the images are shared, that I've never actually put a naked image online? So this is going to become a very, very scary part of online, especially for our kids. And my belief is that cyberbullying is going to skyrocket because I'm going to manipulate your photos. You know, not even necessarily sexually, as we said in the previous one. I could make you put on a lot of weight. I could change. I could make you ugly. I could do anything to you, and I can share those images. So, just to end off my session before I hand over to Karen, one of the what was very scary in a lot of this research is that if we look at the statistics in the 2024 report, over 3,500 new AI generated Kazam images were uploaded into one specific forum that the Internet Watch Foundation was looking at. And what is also important is that the images that are being developed are even more serious and hardcore and graphic, because now we're not using real children. So now I can do really bad things with these images. So we're finding a lot more hardcore scenarios, you know, the rapes, the bestiality, all of those kinds of images. Lots of what we're also finding is the emergence of the actual AI child sexual abuse videos that they're making now, primarily deepfakes, as I say, completely original. These are circulating. They're being shared in the dark web. So what they do is they take adult pornographic videos and then they put the child's face on these as well. And what has also been found is that the key at the moment is taking victims who are already known for having been abused online and then using their images in making new videos. And famous people, famous children, that's a key one. Everybody wants to see famous kids with their clothes off for some unknown reason. I included this one story that the Internet Watch Foundation has mentioned. Is a few years ago, Olivia, that's the name that was given to her, she was horrifically abused. She was raped and she was tortured physically, and everything was videoed and uploaded. She was discovered by the Internet Watch Foundation. She was abused for 5 years between the ages of 3 and 8. And she was discovered by the Internet Watch Foundation, and she was rescued using her images, and they removed all the images offline, online. They were online and they were deleted. What they've now found is that new images are being created using AI with her face years after the abuse ended. And so the AI model for generating these images is available. There's actually an app that you can download now that you can generate images of Olivia herself. The whole app is about generating images of this child who was previously abused. And the Internet Watch Foundation found at least this image being repeated 347 times in only 3 months. So this child who was abused and saved is now being re-abused online using AI. So the capacity for what AI can do is immense. There are apps that you can download legally to create these images. As I said, we used one to create the images I showed you. And they're busy working on AI. It's in the final stages now of being able to develop videos, complete videos will become available. They're testing it at the moment. One of the apps is called a new defying platform, which is and there's a huge volume on that site where you can upload a picture of someone and then it removes their clothes. And of course, these images are then shared. In fact, they are then used for sextortion, even though the child never ever did anything. Yes. So I've got a naked image of you. I'm going to share it unless you do this, unless you send me an image or unless you pay or whatever it can be. The other issue is the existence of what is known as pedophile guides. These are available online as well, where they give you the methodology of how to make these materials, how to use them, how to blackmail children. And in one of the guides, the author showed how he successfully blackmailed 13-year-old girls into sending. He gives you guidance on how to do it. These are called pedophile guides. These are available online, and they also give information on how to create AI information. These models are being developed. The three main ones are at the moment are Stable Video Diffusion, Sora, and VO, and that you can use them to create minute-long videos from text, images, or video. They have been released this year, but only to limited researchers to test them. And everybody is waiting for them to be released for open source. And I just wanted to end off my session with these two comments from perpetrators on the platform. I'll just read them to you. The first comment was, how long until we can use this new Sora software to make whatever video we want? I want to put my sister's photos in from when she was a kid and make her do nasty things. And the other one, I'm seeing the video trailers that were generated by AI and my mind is blown. The ability to create any child porn we desire, our wildest fantasies in high definition. So I think we are sitting in a very dark space in terms of OCSEA. As soon as we think we are getting there, we are now in a space where I think we are going to have to think completely differently about how we address these issues. So key points: adolescents should have access to the internet. They need it both for their intellectual and developmental needs. Adolescents are digital natives. They live online, they develop online. We can't take them out of their world. We can't ban them from their world. So we need to protect them. And that's the key point. How do we protect them? They're very good at protecting themselves online. So we need to give them more knowledge and skills to do so. Parents underestimate their need for digital parenting. We need to address that. And parents bear the responsibility to ensure that children gain benefits, but are also protected online. Parents are responsible for protecting their children offline. They're responsible for protecting their children online. And governments need to make sure that children are safe online. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Cara now, and she's going to very briefly just look at some of the model laws internationally.
So I think that Karen's depressed everybody with the latest presentation on AI, and to a large extent, I'm assuming you're all looking at me for really good, clear answers on how we're going to protect children, and unfortunately I can't do that. But there are 2 points that I'd like to state at the beginning of this presentation on model laws. One is that laws are very, very important. We know that for controlling and for disciplining people's behaviors that are considered to be unacceptable. So we do need the laws. The laws do need to be in place. However, we have to be aware of the fact that the laws are going to have to constantly change as new threats and new issues come along, such as artificial intelligence. But I think for me, the most important message I want to make at the beginning of this lecture is that one of the things we are making a mistake with is that we are making children responsible for protecting themselves. And we can't do that. We know from Karen's lecture on brain development, they don't have the capacity for self-governance. So we do need to have very clear legislative guidelines in place, but also we need to make sure that we're implementing them. And parallel to that is very much what the Indonesia OCSEA program did. We have got to keep informing communities and adults and local government partners and NGOs and civil society organizations. We've got to do them at the same time, because as legislation develops, the implementers of that legislation are going to be those partners, those stakeholder groups. So everything has to happen parallel, and we need to make sure that we don't put the responsibility of protection solely in the hands of children. So let's have a look. UNICEF itself, which has been obviously the core parent body of this OCSEA program in terms of support and funding, and this is what we were here to do in the last week, is really evaluate their role in ensuring that OCSEA was implemented and institutionalized within those 3 pilot sites. But UNICEF itself has developed a model guideline law that countries can use to develop their own legislation. It's called the Legislating for the Digital Age. And it really does provide very clear guidance for countries on really the multi-layered approach to legislation that needs to take place when it comes to protecting children online. So let's have a look at what legislation should include in terms of this model guideline. Obviously, the criminalization of online sexual exploitation. But more importantly, as I said before, is the enforcement of those laws. So legislation is only as good as its implementation can be. And again, what I said to you right at the beginning of this is we have to take that responsibility away from children and put it in the hands of the people who are there to protect children in offline situations as well. Very important, the guideline also emphasizes the need for the development of specialized investigation processes, storage of digital evidence, preservation of that evidence. And I mean, it's quite a complicated system. And I know that a lot of countries are receiving support from way better resourced international global policing systems like Interpol and various others who are guiding them on how these investigation procedures should be done. And I mean, it comes down to even how you unplug a device from the wall if you want to take it as part of evidence collection for an alleged crime that has happened online. So obviously another very important one, and I think this is actually where quite a lot of our emphasis needs to be placed, because businesses, including internet service providers, are really the head of all online development. So regulation for businesses is becoming more and more important, and not just regulation, but sanction for what they are creating, and making sure that when they create these new, really very amazing tools, such as artificial intelligence, that they have in place safety procedures to protect the most vulnerable groups from how those digital tools can be used to exploit them. We also need to strengthen our child protection services for victims of OCSEA. And again, referring to the week that we've been here, there are a lot of really good practices in Indonesia on that. There's a lot of multidisciplinary work. So between different stakeholder groups, we have the integrated services of almost basically a one-stop center, even the social welfare organization or departments, they work very closely hand in hand with other government departments to ensure that services are provided to children. And again, the OCSEA program was incredibly helpful in teaching children about how to report. So when we did the baseline study, that was one of the biggest gaps that we found as well, is that children did not know how to report online exploitation and abuse. They didn't know where to go to. They weren't particularly happy about talking to police. So the OCSEA program has opened up that avenue for them, and given them alternatives to police if they feel that they're not comfortable talking to police about these issues, such as, for example, the integrated services, and also capacitating schools to accept and support children through reporting. Also, the legislation or the legislative guide that UNICEF created looks at redress for child victims. So what can the countries do to compensate children for what they've experienced? And is that through access to therapeutic programs? Is it, support for the family to get through the process? Is it community involvement, which is a very strong component in Indonesia and really should be leveraged for things like support for victims of online exploitation. And then, of course, all monitoring of children's rights and that they are protected in the digital environment. That's why I said at the beginning, it is very important that we don't demonize the internet and the online world for children. Yes, it is risky. Yes, AI is risky. However, as Karen has said, this has become their world. So taking it away from them, because and that is tantamount to punishing the child for what other people are doing on the internet. So we need to punish the correct people. We need to sanction the people using these kinds of legislative guidelines instead of removing children from an environment where they are developing. And if we do that, we are going to have a big problem because children will do it anyway. They will find ways to get online. And if they are doing it secretively, we are even less likely to be able to protect them. Other aspects around the legislative guidelines include things like a central contact point. So, for example, you've got the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. A lot of countries have developed a connection between their reporting frameworks and systems like NCMEC so that they can refer to them. And remember, the reason for this global approach is because the internet has no boundaries. It has no borders. It's not defined by country. It is the entire digital world. So we have to now do global partnerships and global networking and global collaboration if we're going to be able to respond to this effectively. So as much as we have an in-country program, which is very important because each country has its own contextual needs, we do need to understand that those collaborations internationally must take place. The guidelines also talk about specialization, which Karen and I have always been, we've always supported that concept because these are very, very specialized cases. You need to have police and prosecutors who understand children in the digital framework. So, and this is something that we've seen over many years of working with those, particularly those two service provider groups, is that 90% of specializing police and prosecutors is really changing their mindset and developing a sense of empathy in them for what children go through in the online world. And also making sure that they understand that these are not typical crimes where you have, a victim and an offender, and you have clear criminal behavior happening. These are subtle. These are human-related crimes. They're social crimes. They operate under what looks like normal human interaction conditions, like grooming. Grooming, at the end of the day, is the same as any kind of courtship. But if it's being done by a 40-year-old man who happens to have changed his image, as Karen showed you, into a 15-year-old boy, then we need to understand the dynamics of those crimes. It's not the same as somebody stealing my handbag or breaking into my house. Also connections to the child abuse image databases, but bearing in mind that we have to be very careful how that's done, who has access to them, and also the welfare of those people who are accessing those image and databases. And in fact, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there have been movements globally towards creating an international database based on terminology, so hashtags and things like that, so that investigating officers can access the databases without having to see the imagery, because that impact on investigating officers, prosecutors, and court personnel is massive. Forensic laboratories also for the point of being able to analyze digital evidence. So it's not just about specimens and things like that that we've been used to before in sexual exploitation cases, but now we're looking at actually being able to dive deep into a digital tool itself or a digital object. Support services for victims, which again is something that really is a huge influence in this country and just wonderful in terms of its multidisciplinary approach, from volunteers in the community who work with their neighbors, sitting in the middle of alleyways on beautiful batik blankets, having a conversation, sharing their stories, and not ignoring the bruises or the yelling that they hear in the streets at night. So again, I will mention this when I look at good practices, but Indonesia, you are phenomenal when it comes to supporting each other. And then, of course, your normal training of all different stakeholders. Then the guideline also talks about the development of secondary legislation to ensure implementation. So that really becomes more of your operational framework. So who does what? How often do they do it? Who is responsible for what particular area of the law that needs to be implemented? And then strengthening of basic structures for protecting children, specifying things like responding to OCSEA across the broader frameworks. And again, a big thing to emphasize, and this is something that Karen and I also argue quite often, is that when it comes to legislation, people tend to legislate in silos. So suddenly they've got a piece of legislation relating to OCSEA, but they already have legislation in place for sexual exploitation and abuse. So we need to make sure that these pieces of legislation speak to each other, because otherwise people are going to be confused as to what crime is being committed and under which piece of law I should prosecute. So make sure that OCSEA is not addressed in isolation, but rather integrated into broader responses to violence against children. We see this with things like domestic violence legislation as well. As much as it needs to have its own corner, there are already a lot of crimes that are defined in our legislation that relate to domestic violence, like assault and like sexual exploitation and abuse. So let's make sure that whatever legislation is developed is not done in a silo, that it speaks to existing crimes and existing country responses to these issues. Obviously, there's challenges relating to drafting legislation on OCSEA. One of the biggest ones relates to, and it's across the board for all sexual exploitation and abuse and violence crimes, is the agreement on the terminology. Because the crime has no borders, it is very important that every country speaks the same language on what constitutes OCSEA. So we're guided through the Luxembourg guidelines. I'm not going to make your brains freeze with that, but the Luxembourg guidelines really do help us with things like terminology. UNICEF as well, with other UN agencies, has created the, I cannot remember the term now, but it's basically a global definition of violence that they have created different definitions of, that a lot of countries can use to help them draft their terminology. Also, so some of the areas that are recommended in terms of the framework that the UN has created is that we need to start agreeing on what the age of a child is. So in our definitions, any person is a child if they're under 18. Then we've also got to include things like, what is the definition of sexual abuse? What does that include? We've got to look at what exploitation means. And we've got to look at how exploitation and abuse are facilitated with your internet service providers and other ICTs. We also have to make sure that there is a no tolerance or there's no range of acceptance related to children's so-called consent, that at no stage, regardless of whether or not the child has sent sexual images of themselves, regardless of whether the child has responded to that person, whatever. And this is where the empathy and understanding of children is important for service providers, that there is no presumed consent, that we don't have a range of consent, because then that's open for very wide interpretation. However, one area that we do give consideration to is the relationships between adolescents. So, and this is something that's been legislated in different countries. Where we come from, in South Africa, for example, in our sexual offences legislation, we do allow for non-criminalization of adolescents who are having a consensual relationship. But there are criteria. So things like close in age range, no more than 2 years. So in those kinds of situations, we do not criminalize the relationship, because remember what Karen said as well, that sexual development is moving online. So we are going to see more and more children sharing intimate images with each other when they are in a relationship. So we've got to look as well at making sure that the legislation defines specific crimes relating to things like producing, especially with AI coming along, offering, distributing, all of those different issues there, accessing any form of child sexual abuse material, including live streaming of that. And of course, we're going to have to start looking at the criminalization of AI as well. Also, the legislative framework from UNICEF has suggested that children should not be held criminally liable for generating or possessing or voluntarily and consensually sharing sexual content of themselves if it was for private use. However, obviously, for purposes of other children accessing that information and that image and then sending it off as a form of cyberbullying, then we have to take due consideration of that within the legislation. Extortion of children, grooming of children, all of those things need to be legislated against, and also any kind of intentional causing of the child to participate or to witness a sexual abuse or sexual activity through the use of internet facilities. Cyber flashing and cyber stalking now are also things that are being considered and need to be taken into account when we're talking about legislation. And then, of course, introducing your sort of universal jurisdiction. So removing the fact that offences are only taking place in a particular space, understanding that once those images are made available, they will be out in the entire global space. And then, of course, looking at things like extradition, sending people to countries where the victims have experienced that exploitation. Then very importantly, and I'm going to do this quite quickly because I don't want to take up too much time, please, 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 we need to start making the private sector responsible as well. They have to be regulated, they have to be monitored, they have to be sanctioned for what they create and the platforms they make available where they do not put in place safety protection measures for children. So again, this is going to have to be a conversation with business. It's a difficult conversation because businesses, and we've seen it all over the world, that there is this pushback from the private sector around being regulated by governments around the production of tools and applications that are their bread and butter. But I think at this stage, we really have to just make them understand that they are equally responsible for the protection of children because they are producing the spaces where children can be exploited. So, for example, consider making it mandatory for businesses to report online child sexual abuse material. Also things like detecting proactively child sexual abuse material that is accessed or stored on their products and services. And we see that very often. Somebody will be doing an internet search for children's clothing, and inappropriate content will pop up when you're doing that Google search. So businesses need to have in place a person or a department that's sole job is to ensure that the back end of their websites and their systems are monitored and are exploitation free. Oops. Also, legislation must be allowed to enter a building and seize and remove any computer or data or any other objects and tools that are used in the facilitation of child abuse and exploitation. All other factors, chain of custody of digital data, there should be legislation setting out rules on the admissibility of digital and forensic evidence. So there's quite a lot of stuff that needs to be put in place, which is probably already in place in many instances around the investigation of these things. Then the legislation contemplated, and this is not in the UNICEF guidelines, this is now Karen coming up with brilliant ideas of starting to introduce how the law can try very hard to stop this train that is the artificial intelligence. So suggestions include things like that it becomes an offense to train an AI tool to be able to generate child sexual abuse material, or for an AI tool to generate or that also to generate that material. Right. That pedophile manuals, which we've just spoken about, should be made completely illegal, and the person who created it should be prosecuted as well. That it is an offense to use personal data or digital information to create digital models or files that facilitate the creation of CSAM. And considering the fact that they are now launching this ability to use text, to translate text into images and videos, and you'll see this, you have all seen this, if you open up a website and your computer takes a while to generate the images, you will see a text description of what the picture looks like as the page is loading. Pay attention the next time you do that, because that's exactly what that is. It's taken text and the text is translated into the image. So, so that's how they've done it in the past, is that they've taken the image first and then they've given it a textual description, so that when you load it onto the computer, you do it by means of text. Now they're doing the same thing where you can load text and the computer would be able to generate the image. So, again, we need to put something in place to ensure that any kind of models or files that are created cannot be used to make CSAM. Also, legislation to tackle the rise in generative AI chatbots, and then legislation to ensure nudifying technology is not available. Why it's even a thing is beyond me, because it's just no. So that could possibly be a first start. This thing. Okay, and then the final area before I end is looking at best practices. I'm trying very hard to get this to go to that screen. So best practices, we've just taken a couple of examples from around the world. For example, in the Republic of Ireland, they've got a really, really lovely model there called the Lundy model. It's a very good example of child participation, and it's an entire package of resources and tools that can be used to include children's involvement in decision-making. So all different types of activities and practices, how children can be involved in development in projects, programs, in services, and even at policy development level. So the package includes things like a planning checklist of how to include children in a particular project, a monitoring and evaluation checklist, so checking to see, have you involved them? How are they involved? An everyday spaces checklist for children and young people to allow them to give feedback on their participation. So very similar to the U reports as well, and the Joko Control. Joko Control, I'm saying that correctly. Yay! So that would be an example of that. That's similar to this Lundy project. So very nice one. If you're interested, go and have a look at how they do it for child participation. An example of how governments work in the UK, they've got a council dedicated to internet safety. And it's led by the UK government's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, as well as in collaboration with the Department for Education and the Home Office. So there's a multi-stakeholder sector group that's been created, and it is their job to create, to govern and implement this council on internet safety. It also includes academia and other experts. So 15 experts, which I really, really like, because government, as much as you guys are amazing, you don't know everything. So it's really good to bring in those who have different expertise in different areas. So NGOs, industry players, please, we can no longer just have government and civil society in the room. The private sector has got to become a very strong part of this discussion. They do a lot of research, and they use the research to provide evidence to inform what action should happen to improve children's online safety. So that's very similar to what we did here. The baseline, I mean, you had the disrupting harm study, followed by a much more intensive and deeper dive study with the baseline. You've got a lot of evidence that's generated by the Joko Concho site. You've got your review reports. So yeah, you've got your Jagabarang. So as I go through these best practices, I'm going to just insert the good practices that we found in Indonesia as well. And I hope you guys feel very proud as you hear what we've done. The council in the UK as well, by the way, basically acts as a research watchdog. And they have the power to influence and inform policy and practice at country level. So again, I think it's important that governments have a look at dedicating a particular space to this, because I think it's big enough to warrant that kind of investment. They've also got a child abuse image database, which is a centralized database in England. And that's really to help investigate OCSEA cases faster. And this is where what I was referring to before, where prosecutors and police officers don't have to see the images. They are literally able to identify if an image they've got is already flagged as child sexual abuse material through text and hashtags. So they're given codes. And I think that's really, really important, that police and prosecution and courts are protected themselves from having to constantly be exposed to this type of imagery. It's not pleasant. We're going to have a lot of very unhappy and service providers who are going to need a lot of therapy if we don't put in safeguarding measures for them. Then in South Africa, we have very much a holistic approach. It's not just a response to OCSEA, which is, I think, important, because again, you can't separate OCSEA from offline sexual abuse and exploitation cases. So our approach has been about providing services for any vulnerable group. So it's as broad as vulnerable groups, and for domestic violence cases, for sexual offences cases, for human trafficking cases. So we have dedicated courts that are designated to only work with those types of cases. And then we've introduced quite a number of court accommodations. So for example, our witnesses do not have to testify in the same courtroom as the offender. They're linked to the main courtroom from a separate room through closed circuit television, and they are assisted by a very specialized service provider called a court intermediary, whose job is to hear the questions in the courtroom, relay that question to the child in a developmentally appropriate way and without the aggression that normally comes with those questions. And then the child can be heard by the court when giving their response. So it really does protect the child from the negativity and the trauma of being part of a criminal process. Other court support processes include things like court preparation programs, which are there to really teach people what it means to be a witness in court. And those are offered by dedicated court preparation officers who provide support to the witness throughout their trial process. In Korea, we've got OCSEA support programs. There you've got your Ministry of Gender Equality, which established the Digital Sexual Crime Victim Support Center. Very fancy. And it offers dedicated and comprehensive services for OCSEA cases, such as counseling. What I love about this is deleting support. So they are responsible for going online and deleting images as much as they can. They also have dedicated investigating officers. They have legal support people who will provide legal aid to the victims. And then they also monitor posts that might include any of the images or information going forward. So that's great. They provide financial assistance for medical expenses, and they collect data, which is very important. Back to the UK, they've got an independent regulator called in the Office of the Communications, Ofcom, and that organization is specifically it's related to the development of their safety bill, and that Ofcom will have the power to oversee and enforce legal requirements imposed on online service providers. So this is where you get the regulator for the industry. This is what I was saying about industry being watched. You need a watchdog for industry to make sure that they are not producing tools and things that will compromise children. So in terms of the safety bill, the Ofcom will have the power to compel online service providers to provide information, require an individual from an online service provider to attend an interview, entry and inspection. They have the power to issue enforcement notifications. They have the power to impose financial penalties of up to £18 million or 10% of the qualifying worldwide revenue. So it's quite hectic. They have the power to apply to the courts in certain cases for an order to impose business disruption if a provider doesn't comply with what they've asked them to do. And they produce codes of conduct for online service providers. So really, really nice. Maybe for going forward, Indonesia can have a look at Ofcom and how they've set that up as a regulator. Then Cambodia, this was part of an assessment Karen did directly. So she was working with Cambodia on best practices around also online response or OCSEA response. And she found that there was a very good practice here with the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications in Cambodia. They've developed a very good relationship with businesses. And again, we know, even from Indonesia, that relationships are the core to the success of any response. So Indonesia has fantastic relationships across multiple sectors. But interestingly enough, in this project, we didn't see any business. We haven't seen any relationship with the business sector. So maybe that's an area that needs to be looked at. The ministry holds a lot of workshops with businesses and gets their input on the development of policies and guidelines, which is lovely because it means that businesses buy into the process. They're part of the development of it. And they even took responsibility for guideline development, and they started implementing those guidelines even without legislation telling them that they had to. And what she also saw, which was really nice, is that the larger businesses, which have more resources, were helping through this collective and collaboration, were helping smaller businesses with implementation. So that is the end of those good practices. Just as a final point, I would just like to say there are, as Ibu Chiput mentioned at the beginning, there were lots of good practices that we saw, and we still have to write the report up, so give us a bit of time. But without even having to analyze and be all clever about this report, possibly the goodest of the good practices, because we're not allowed to use the word best. So we're using goodest. And I don't know how the translator is going to deal with that one. But the goodest of the good practices is child participation in this country. It is phenomenal how much children were engaged with at every level of this process. The campaign development, the children's forums are phenomenal and really an incredible strength to the country of Indonesia in protecting children. Another good practice that really took Karen and I by surprise, because we haven't seen it anywhere else, is the involvement of the elderly. Wonderful, because of course, and we come from a lower middle income country as well. We come from an under-resourced country. We're similar. That's why Karen and I love working in Asia so much, because we have similar resource issues, right? We don't come from the States. We don't come from Europe. So in our countries as well, a lot of kids are raised by grandparents because parents are working, or because there are, in our country specifically, unfortunately, there are very few families that have both a father and a mother. So grandparents are often brought in to provide that extra support. And nowhere are they included in this OCSEA thing, and until we came here. And we were just thrilled to see how involved the elderly are in learning about the digital space and learning about how they can guide the young ones that they have responsibility over in their communities. So we would like to say huge congratulations to Indonesia, to UNICEF,
And
to
the
the governments. Hey?
The jingle bells.
Oh, yes, sorry. And also the jingles. So the Jaga Barang, brilliant. We got a chance to dance to the song. We've been doing this all around the pilot sites. We've been OCSEAing ourselves into a coma. It's brilliant. But what's fabulous about the jingle is everybody knows it. So without even thinking about having to sit down and have a workshop, all people need to do is, you know, say OCSEA, and then suddenly everybody's doing the different iconic gestures. And it's just, it really is wonderful. And it allows for the transfer of knowledge without even having to do anything too hectic. So that was another very good practice that we identified. So yes, to go back to my ending, congratulations to Indonesia, to all the stakeholders, with support from UNICEF, the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, the implementing partners at a non-government level, the communities, the children. Just a brilliant job, and thank you for letting us be a part of it. Thank you.
Baik, terima kasih Karen and Karan sudah berbagi catatan-catatan penting dan sebetulnya berbagai upaya praktek baik yang tadi telah disampaikan di beberapa negara terkait perlindungan anak di ranah daring, ini sebagian sudah berjalan di Indonesia, tapi memang belum optimal ya, dengan sesuai dengan panduan kebijakan perlindungan anak di ranah daring oleh UNICEF Global tadi. Dan ini tentu menjadi catatan pembelajaran buat kita semua. Nah, Bapak Ibu, tadi kalau saya sih mencatat tantangan semakin besar dengan keberadaan teknologi AI ya, intelijensi buatan yang tadi memang seberbahaya itu, khususnya karena begitu mudah orang mempergunakan perintah-perintah kepada aplikasi-aplikasi AI itu, sehingga bisa mewujudkan imajinasi jahat mereka untuk melakukan kekerasan secara seksual, eksploitasi seksual pada anak. Jadi saya juga belajar dari APH yang sudah menangani berbagai kasus kekerasan dan eksploitasi anak di ranah daring. yang menyebutkan bahwa para kriminal dengan otak kriminalnya itu selalu bisa menemukan entry point, gimana mereka bisa eksploitasi, mempergunakan perkembangan-perkembangan teknologi, bahkan juga perkembangan aturan. Nah, di kesempatan ini, karena sebagian besar Bapak Ibu adalah peserta dari provinsi, saya ingin juga melaporkan bahwa Kementerian Komunikasi dan Digital sudah mengarah kepada kebijakan untuk perlindungan anak di ranah daring sesuai amanat Undang-Undang ITE nomor 1 tahun 2024 untuk mengatur dunia usaha yang disebutnya kalau dari undang-undang itu adalah penyelenggara sistem elektronik, khususnya yang di ranah private. Nah, mudah-mudahan nanti kita tunggu hasilnya. Tapi kalau misalnya di peserta hari ini ada rekan kami dari reference group yang dari Kementerian Komdigi yang hadir, mungkin juga berkenan untuk berbagi perkembangan-perkembangan untuk termasuk pembatasan usia, anak untuk memiliki akun medsos dan lain-lain bisa disampaikan. Nah, sebelum itu sambil menunggu, kami mengundang kalau dari Bapak Ibu peserta yang tidak harus bertanya, tetapi juga bisa menyampaikan apa ya, apa yang Bapak Ibu tangkap dari sesi ini yang kemudian bisa memberikan ide kepada Bapak Ibu semua untuk penyelenggara layanan ataupun pembuat kebijakan ataupun dari aparat penegak hukum untuk bisa memperdomani dan bisa juga melihat celah-celah yang bisa dilakukan untuk sesuai dengan kewenangan masing-masing. Nah, saya ini sudah melihat ada 3 peserta yang sudah angkat tangan. Saya mulai dari Ibu Asima. Silakan Ibu Asima, bisa di-unmute panitia ya. Silakan Ibu, singkat, padat. Mungkin bisa juga menjelaskan Ibu dari mana dulu sedikit. Kemudian menyampaikan pandangan, pertanyaan, dan lain-lain. Silakan Ibu Asima. Ini salah satu aktivis kami, Ibu Karen, yang memberikan perlindungan anak. Silakan Ibu.
Ibu Ciput atas kesempatannya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Azima Subah, Ketua Umum Perhimpunan Masyarakat Tolak Pornografi. Kebetulan saya juga anggota dari unsur praktisi di Subgugus Tugas Pencegahan dan Penanganan Pornografi. Beberapa waktu yang lalu kami mendapat pelatihan tentang penanganan pornografi, pendekatan keterangan ahli untuk BAP tindak pidana pornografi. Nah, di diskusi itu atau di pelatihan itu terkait dengan acara kita hari ini ada satu hal yang sama begitu ya. Tadi yang disampaikan oleh Ibu Ciput dan juga Ibu Karen dan Ibu Karen ya, yaitu tantangan terhadap AI. Nah, ternyata aparat penegak hukum itu masih kesulitan, Bu, kalau untuk indikasi gitu ya, atau untuk memasukkan kasus-kasus pornografi itu apabila anak menjadi objek. Nah, pertama adalah tadi ya, ada tantangan AI. Yang kedua adalah apabila anak-anak ini tidak menggunakan seragam, terutama anak-anak yang sudah mungkin umur 15 sampai menjelang 18 tahun, itu kan porsi atau kondisi fisik atau tubuhnya itu mirip sekali dengan orang dewasa. Nah, tantangan ini mungkin juga bisa begitu ya, Kementerian Pemberdayaan Perempuan dan Perlindungan Anak bisa turut membantu para penegak hukum ini ataupun kami dari praktisi apabila menjadi saksi ahli memberi pelatihan-pelatihan, Bu, gitu ya. Tadi kan ada salah satunya dari Ibu Karen itu usulan untuk melakukan banyak training begitu ya, sehingga kami atau praktisi maupun aparat penegak hukum bisa secara rigid begitu ya menangkap kasus kriminal bahwa ini benar-benar pornografi anak. Gitu. Karena kebetulan di Indonesia ini agak uniknya gitu ya, ini bisa juga jadi keuntungan buat kita. Definisi pornografi anak itu adalah pornografi yang subjeknya anak atau orang dewasa yang berperilaku seperti anak. Nah, kalau itu bisa juga didefinisikan pornografi atau orang dewasa yang berperilaku seperti anak, maka dia bisa kena pornografi anak. Deliknya itu ada pemberatan, Bu, sepertiga. Jadi minimal tadinya 6 bulan, bisa jadi 8 bulan, minimal tadinya maksimal dendanya tadinya 6 miliar, bisa sampai 8 miliar. Mungkin itu masukan dari saya. Terima kasih, mohon tanggapan dari narasumber juga. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Terima kasih Bu Asima. Bu Karen and Karen, kita akan tampung dulu semua pertanyaan, kemudian nanti bisa dijawab secara bersamaan ya. Selanjutnya Pak Agus Dwi Andrianto, silakan Pak Agus.
Terima kasih.
Pak Agus dari mana
Assalamualaikum.
Pak Agus?
Dari Pekalongan, Bu.
Maksudnya ininya, unitnya?
Dari pemerintah Kota Pekalongan.
Oke, silakan.
Uh, Bu pembicara yang baik, sekarang ini bagaimana merubah mindset anak-anak untuk tanggap dan mengerti bahwa dia mengakses konten yang pornografi itu, karena kadang gini, rayuan untuk melihat konten itu sangat deras, baik dari teman-teman atau dari pihak lain gitu. Itu yang pertama, how to change minds of child to understand that content is very dangerous. Terus kemudian yang kedua, di pengadilan misalnya anak itu ketika dia menjadi pelaku atau korban, itu kadang banyak yang di kepolisian lah, itu banyak yang bertanya kepada anak itu, sehingga anak itu menjadi tertekan, trauma gitu. Dan juga kadang dari media pun sedemikian deras untuk bertanya kepada anak, sehingga menjadi anak itu tertekan. Nah, akhirnya informasi tentang si anak ini itu menjadi tersebar kemana-mana. Nah, yang saya tanyakan, apakah ada kebijakan dari pemerintah untuk perlindungan anak di masa depan, untuk anak tersebut bisa berganti identitas, merubah nama. Karena kalau di luar negeri itu bisa terjadi, tapi saya belum pernah mendengar itu di Indonesia. Terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Agus. Nanti mungkin maksudnya bertanya, bisa jadi Ibu Karen berdua memiliki informasi ya, sebetulnya kebijakan untuk anak atau seorang korban untuk mengganti identitas untuk menghindari dia menerima stigma ataupun diskriminasi di masa depan itu seperti apa di negara yang lain, karena memang betul kita belum ada. Terima kasih Pak Agus. Selanjutnya ini adik ya kalau nggak salah, adik Raudatul Hasanah. Silakan.
Sip. Terima kasih Mbak Ciput. Suaraku kedengeran?
Jelas.
Oke. eh ya, perkenalan dulu kali ya. Namaku Rodatul Hasan Ahli, saat ini sebagai staf ahli di Komnas Disabilitas.
Ini
Ya.
apa namanya? Masih muda banget ya,
Eh,
Mbak Sana. Jadi makanya aku tadi pikir aku adik-adik dari forum mana. Silakan.
Tapi ya memang aku dulunya adalah aktif di forum anak gitu ya.
Oh,
Cuman
mantap.
sekarang fokus, betul ya,
Sip.
forum anak Provinsi Aceh khususnya.
Ah,
Sekarang udah fasilitator ya.
ya, ya. Lanjut.
Ya, karena sekarang aku bertugas di Komnas Disabilitas gitu ya, jadi perspektifnya akan dari perspektif disabilitas tentu gitu. Jadi tadi aku memperhatikan presentasinya dari Miss Karen dan juga Miss Karen ya, both of Miss Karen. But we haven't discussed about how AI will give impactful for disability children gitu. Ini memang aku menangkapnya di situ di AI poinnya. Memang AI ini kan sebagai kemajuan dari peradaban manusia gitu ya. Cuman ada resiko serius sebenarnya yang dihadapi oleh anak-anak khususnya disabilitas gitu. Yang pertama mungkin AI ini kan sepertinya belum dirancang untuk mempertimbangkan juga bagaimana kebutuhan dari anak-anak dengan disabilitas gitu. Sehingga akan ada dampak-dampak yang diberikan khususnya untuk anak dengan disabilitas gitu ya. Contohnya seperti studi kasus bagaimana kemudian algoritma dari AI menjadi bias dalam sistemnya sehingga anak dengan disabilitas yang mengakses AI lebih rentan dengan eksklusi di dunia digital gitu. Harus ada regulasi harusnya menurutku ya, harus ada regulasi yang menangani khusus tentang ini gitu. Kemudian yang kedua, AI di dunia pendidikan. Sebenarnya ini AI diterapkan di dunia pendidikan, ini inklusi atau jadi eksklusi gitu ya untuk anak disabilitas gitu. Masalahnya adalah AI di sekolah gitu ya. Beberapa sekolah menerapkan AI untuk pembelajarannya gitu. Seringkali kan ini nggak ramah untuk anak disabilitas. Belum lagi kita bicara soal SLB gitu, sekolah yang khusus memang menangani untuk anak teman-teman disabilitas. Tapi sekarang sekolah reguler pun sudah diharuskan untuk inklusi gitu kan. Tapi kemudian ini kan jadi persoalan lagi gitu. Apakah sekolah inklusi ini sudah apa ya, benar-benar memahami kebutuhan khusus kebutuhan dari anak-anak dengan disabilitas gitu. E-learning misalkan, e-learning itu menurut kita belum mampu untuk menyesuaikan dengan metode pembelajaran untuk anak autisme misalkan atau untuk anak dengan gangguan kognitif lainnya gitu ya. Ini kan jadi masalah gitu. Kemudian yang ketiga, poin yang ketiga adalah AI ini mungkin sekali untuk mengeksploitasi data dan juga privasi dari anak dengan disabilitas gitu. AI ini kan dia sifatnya bisa mengumpulkan data pribadi ya untuk meningkatkan pengalaman pengguna gitu. Tapi kemudian jadi resiko baru juga bagi anak dengan disabilitas yang menggunakan teknologi AI ini untuk ya apapun itulah basisnya apakah itu untuk pembelajaran ataupun untuk komunikasi gitu. Tapi kemudian informasi ataupun edukasi yang baik tentang penggunaan AI ini kan belum tentu nyampe juga ke anak disabilitas gitu. Jadi kemudian ini jadi ancaman juga untuk anak-anak dengan disabilitas eksploitasi data dan juga privasinya mereka gitu kan. Kemudian ini yang paling penting menurutku terkait dengan deepfake atau cyberbullying ya. AI ini kan bisa digunakan untuk membuat deepfake gitu ya, konten palsu, kemudian juga ya konten yang disinformasikan gitu ya, yang bisa mempermalukan anak dengan disabilitas atau justru menyesatkan gitu anak-anak dengan disabilitas gitu. Contohnya misalkan untuk anak-anak yang tuli misalkan atau punya gangguan gangguan bicara gitu ya atau anak disabilitas dengan gangguan motorik misalkan ini bisa lebih rentan untuk jadi korban perundungan online melalui manipulasi AI karena memang lagi-lagi kita bicara soal akses gitu ya. Jadi memang kalau dari kacamatanya Komnas Disabilitas sendiri gitu AI ini masih menjadi tantangan sekali untuk penerapannya khususnya untuk anak dengan disabilitas gitu ya. Untuk anak yang non disabilitas aja kita masih menghadapi tantangan yang segitu ruwetnya gitu. Kemudian kita bicara lagi dari perspektif disabilities gitu. Ya, jadi ini memang jadi PR kita bersama dan mohon tanggapannya dari Miss Karen berdua ya. Mungkin itu aja, Mbak.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Asana, pertanyaannya luar biasa, sangat tajam dan itu memang sangat penting untuk jadi perhatian dan saya sepakat masih belum banyak perhatian aspek keramahan terhadap penyandang disabilitas, apalagi anak ya, karena mereka juga sudah double gitu rentannya. Nah, kita jawab dulu 3 pertanyaan ini, Karen. Karena sudah ada 3 penanya lagi, 6 penanya lagi yang sudah juga menunggu kesempatan. Silahkan.
Thank you for the comments and the questions. So I'm going to just respond then first to the first request, which was around changing the mindset of children. I mean, that's a very broad question, and it's difficult to make a very clear answer for it. But if we're taking into account children's development and their brain development, it's not so much about changing something, it's about working with it. And one of the, probably in our experience of working with particularly adolescents, the thing that makes the most impact on children's mindsets is the ability to open up communication between them and a trusted person. So because when it comes to getting children to see a different perspective, particularly your adolescents, it has to come through a mutually respected communication process. So in terms of that, and always including children's voices in decisions that affect them. So those are some of the aspects that I can respond to. Karen's going to say something else.
Changing a mindset is education.
Yeah,
it's really the only way, and the way we treat children. What is very important in terms of changing mindset relates to actually accessing parents. Because if we look at, for example, the pornography issue that was raised, children who will be attracted to that kind of information are usually children who have had some kind of an experience that creates that. So either it's I'm doing it because it's not okay and I'm rebelling as a result of a particular family situation or whatever it may be. So children who have been given the correct upbringing, the correct parenting support, where parents have discussed sex, where parents have discussed issues of pornography with them and what the implications are the kids who are best able to deal with this. So a lot of changing children's mindset is changing the parents' mindset first and enabling them and supporting them to be better parents, which prevents that whole issue. And I think that is actually quite a big key to changing a child's attitude to something, because we all bring our attitudes from our families. So it's that attitude that we need to, I think, focus a lot on our parenting programs, so that they're a lot wider in terms of communication, discussing issues, discussing things that would be taboo outside of the household, but not necessarily taboo between the family, and giving children information. Because we find that a lot of kids access pornography because they're trying to find out what sex is.
Yeah.
They've heard about it, they've heard people discuss, they've mentioned, but what is it? And where do I find it? So I can't discuss it with family, I can't discuss it with parents, so I go online and I find out what is sex, and up pops pornography, and I get the whole incorrect concept of what sex is. So children who have a good idea of what it is don't necessarily seek that information. So again, it's parenting.
And the research that's been done on the impact of pornography on children is very, very clear that it's actually undoing so much of the gender equality, the respect, the gender respect that has been done over decades and decades, because boys and girls are watching pornography, which is, by the sheer nature of it, is around male dominance and female submission. And boys are thinking that is accurate for their role, and girls are thinking that submission is accurate for theirs. So it is massively damaging in terms of the rights of women, you know, all of the things that we've been working to try and achieve over the last couple of decades. So yeah. Then in terms of the comment made around the court process, well, that's been Karen and my journey for the last 27 years together. I mean, we created our institute, the Child Witness Institute, because court processes we found were more harmful in many instances than the actual crime that children experienced. So for that, it requires a whole system strengthening, and that starts very much in terms of training and paradigm shifting amongst all the role players involved in the criminal justice system. So if we want to introduce trauma-informed and child-friendly justice systems, it's really about equipping all the role players from law enforcement and social services, even civil society organizations, all the way up to the judiciary, to understand and empathize with the experiences that children have, and to create courtrooms that promote finding truth, as opposed to really put too many challenges in place for that. And it can be done. It's been done around the world. There are many, many good examples of what child-friendly court systems do and how they actually support children to participate.
What's also really important, especially for OCSEA, is the fact that many of the role players, whether they are police, but specifically prosecutors and judiciary, are very judgmental of children in the OCSEA environment. You know, it's very different if a child has been raped, because we all have sympathy. You know, there's nothing a child could have done about it. But with OCSEA, they're sharing photographs, so it's their own fault. You know, they're to blame for what has happened. That they were answering the questions, they met the person, whatever it may be, and that judgment comes across very strongly when children are interviewed. So they don't give information, they don't share, they don't say what happened, and we don't actually get good cases, because the children are hiding information simply because they're being blamed for what has happened. So in terms of the criminal justice system, we have to change the mindset, and that requires a lot of training and work, which is possibly the next step. I'm not sure.
And then the final one that was discussed with us now was around children with disabilities. You know, it was actually, I'm glad you've mentioned it. I'm glad you are represented on this platform, because that was another good practice that came out of this research, was the fact that it's the only one around the world that it has included children with disabilities as part of the participant group. And what we learned from doing the research with children with disabilities was, in fact, it's a double-edged sword, because the internet, for the first time in a lot of these children's lives, they are able to participate like other kids, because the internet takes away their disability. It provides them with the tools to be able to communicate if they have communication problems, to see if they're blind, because then they can hear things. Again, you know, nobody can see them sitting in a wheelchair, because the internet's not interested in that. It's a platform where their disability is really, it can disappear. So it is so important, particularly for them, because of that child development that Karen mentioned around identity and intimacy, where it's really leveled the playing ground for children with disabilities, because they can participate as much as an able-bodied child on the internet space. But you're quite correct. I mean, they do represent a particularly vulnerable group, although a lot of what they are vulnerable to is not that much different to able-bodied children. They're still, as much as you can use artificial intelligence to manipulate an able-bodied child's body online, so can that be done for a child with a disability. I think where the danger comes is that children with disabilities possibly rely more on their involvement online, because, as I said, it is the one place where their disability doesn't need to be what identifies them.
And the training needs to be
Um,
specific.
You mentioned that? Tom?
Yeah. The other, I think a key issue that's different here is that the training materials would have to be adapted for the different groups.
Yeah.
Children with cognitive disabilities are going to require special programs in order to understand the whole AI concept.
Yeah.
So it's just the manner and the content that is going to have to be different and specific to certain groups of children with disabilities.
And again, I mean, I want to re-emphasize that we've got to stop placing all the responsibility on children to protect themselves online. They should be allowed to be able to use these tools freely and safely. So again, it goes back to not necessarily our reaction or response to children with disabilities, but our reaction and response to business and to internet service providers to once again be held accountable for what they allow to be made with the tools they create. Thank you. Next load.
Oke, terima kasih. Sebagian terjawab, tapi memang kita waktunya terbatas. Nah, selanjutnya untuk ini Ibu Aisyah, apakah sudah bisa on
Ya,
cam dan
baik. Terima
ya,
kasih, Ibu. Ini
silakan.
saya mohon maaf belum bisa on cam. Saya langsung
Oke.
sampaikan saja dalam bahasa Inggris. Terima kasih
Mungkin channelnya
sebelumnya.
diganti, Bu. Channelnya Ibu ganti ke bahasa Inggris, jadi supaya nggak double.
Channelnya, oke. Iya, atau sebentar ya. Saya nggak tahu caranya gimana, Bu. Interpretasi berarti maksudnya ya. Oke.
Ya.
Yeah, okay, baik. So, hi, Karen and Karen. I'm Asha. I'm a member of the Child Civil Rights Participation and Children of Minority and Remote Areas Working Group at the Indonesian Child Protection Commission. So Indonesia's had a history of partial content restriction on social media platforms. These platforms have long been mandated by a ministerial regulation to put a sensitive content filter on photos and videos that are deemed unsafe for individuals under 18. In the new administration, I believe you've heard that the government has announced a plan to improve the safety of children online, set to be stronger than ever before, by implementing a complete restriction for individuals under 18 years old to create an account. It's gauged in your presentation that children would still need access to social media, and so to strip off their right to have an account just doesn't sound right. My question is, are you saying that partial content restriction should still be a priority instead of complete restriction for children on social media? And also, if possible, could you please elaborate a bit on ways to identify effective age verification methods? That's it. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih Bu Aisyah. Selanjutnya Pak Tuaman, ini Kominfo tertulisnya. Silakan Pak.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Ciput. Hello, Karen and Karen. I have to shut off my camera because I have issue in signal. Jadi gini pertanyaan saya Bu Ciput. Tadi saya menyimak bahwa artinya beberapa peran penting dalam pelindungan anak ini dalam konteks dunia digital itu kan paling tidak saya mencatat ada 5 peran. Tadi ada anak, pelibatan anak, edukasi anak, orang tua, pemerintah dan termasuk juga bagaimana meminimalisir pergerakan pelaku di dunia digital. Nah, pertanyaan saya mungkin buat Karen and Karen itu kebetulan kami sedang menyusun yang namanya peraturan government regulation gitu ya terkait dengan tata kelola pelindungan anak dalam penyelenggaraan sistem elektronik. Yang perlu dicatat adalah ini konteks bagaimana pelibatan penyelenggara sistem elektronik yang bertanggung jawab dalam mengupayakan pelindungan anak dalam dunia digital. Nah, saya penasaran dengan diskusi tadi di mana sebenarnya point of view dari masing-masing speakers itu saya melihat lebih pada bagaimana melindungi anak. Tetapi pertanyaan dari sebenarnya yang mendasar dari saya adalah sebenarnya untuk melindungi anak ini angle mana yang kita harus kedepankan? Apakah peran serta dari penyelenggara sistem elektronik atau electronic system provider, atau uh, ketika terjadi kasus maka ditegakkan, tadi ada juga bicara mengenai court begitu ya, atau kepada orang tua atau kepada anak, karena saya penasaran dengan bicara pelindungan anak ini, bicara holistik, artinya uh, uh, kadangkala kami menemukan korban, anak sebagai korban atau sebagai objek itu direct langsung dari si pelaku tanpa melibatkan sistem elektronik, tanpa penyelenggara elektronik, atau menggunakan artificial intelligence. Contohnya misalkan dalam kacamata RPP ataupun government regulation, tata kelola pelindungan anak, itu jelas PSE sebagai intermediary. Penyelenggara itu harus memastikan jangan sampai layanannya itu, produknya itu dapat sehingga anak tidak terlindungi. Artinya mungkin akan saja memfasilitasi sehingga anak menjadi korban begitu. Tapi saya menjadi penasaran ketika apakah berapa persen yang mana lebih signifikan ketika pelaku itu langsung kepada anak atau pelaku itu melalui sistem hadir untuk anak gitu. Karena kacamatanya rasanya akan berbeda ya ketika kita bicara melindungi anak, ketika kita melihat mengatur PSE atau electronic system provider harus bertanggung jawab untuk melindungi anak. Ternyata saya tadi menemukan ternyata ada juga offenders itu langsung kepada anak tanpa melibatkan contoh melalui fasilitasi sistem atau apapun. Nah ini berat kemana ya, Bu Karen? Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Tuaman. Ini pas sekali Pak ya narasumber kita untuk semua yang sudah berproses di Komdigi.
Can we respond to that one quickly? Because I think
Yes, oke. Silakan
Okay.
it's
Karen.
going to get heavy.
Yeah. It's an impossible one to answer because this is a holistic approach. Our perpetrators use all different angles, and there isn't one more prevalent than the other. We have predators who will access children in peer-to-peer groups. We have predators who will access children through sport, we've got them now doing it through AI, and it's going to be those predators who are obviously more able for AI, who are more technologically savvy, who will access those, whereas ones who aren't will do other kinds of grooming. So you have to stop it at basically close all holes.
Yeah.
Where the digital and technological environment is important is the access that it has for example, giving access to pornography for children and those kinds of programs. So it's a holistic thing, and it's almost impossible to say which is the most important, but you already have a very good basis in terms of education and knowledge and children protecting themselves. But digital and court responses would be probably the next areas to focus on in the meantime, but not one is more important than the other.
And this is the reason why multi-sector collaboration is so important. So, not everybody has to have a little piece of the pie to work on, right? So you've got the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection that's done all of this hard work on doing exactly what you've mentioned, teaching kids about the risks and how to protect themselves, providing parenting programs, supporting service providers. So that work is already being done. And so you need, through the ICT sector, that needs to slot in. It gets its own piece of the pie. And then the whole pie is done. So it's not one or the other. It's working together to, as Karen said, whoever's responsible for that hole must fix that hole, and so on and so forth. And then you will have a full holistic response to violence against children in the online space. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih Karen. Kalau mungkin pertanyaan yang pertama tadi, apakah sudah bisa dijawab juga yang pandangan terkait pembatasan usia anak untuk mengakses media sosial dengan berbagai risiko?
As we've seen from the presentation, online is very important for children developmentally. You know, if you consider that before we would let our children socialize offline at parties, go visit friends, those kinds of things, they're doing it online now, and to stop children from doing that is going to affect them developmentally and socially. So, and this is difficult to say, but for me personally, the internet online becomes very important for children from puberty. They need to start developing a sense of who they are. They need to make friends, and that all starts from puberty. So for me, children under puberty, under 12, do not have to be attached in any way to to online from a developmental perspective. Obviously, academically they can, but then they need to be accompanied by parents or teachers or caregivers. From puberty 12 onwards, children should be able to access the online environment and be informed about it.
And I know that that's controversial, and you know, I think a lot of this conversation started with what was being done in Australia, and again, those kinds of knee-jerk responses without really good empirical data to base it on can be quite dangerous. And as mentioned, and I think we said this in our presentation, is that you can tell children not to do something and they will still do it. But if you take away their right to it and therefore their support to do it safely by making them go secret and underground, you are putting them at higher risk. So they will do it. They will find some way to do it. I mean, even parents will advocate for that. We have parents who get children into social media platforms that are way below the age. They lie about the date of their birth. Parents do it so that children are on those platforms. So we've got to stop asking whether it should or shouldn't happen, and we should start looking at how do we ensure their safety while they navigate that space. Thanks.
Ya, terima kasih. Ini masih ada 6 penanya. Saya pengen Bapak Ibu, karena kita waktunya ini sudah hampir jam 12 WIB, mungkin kita maksimal sampai 12.30. Jadi mohon pertanyaannya disampaikan secara singkat. Beberapa hal yang sudah ditanyakan tadi mungkin tidak perlu diulang ya. Silakan yang sudah terlihat videonya nih Pak Gusman. Silakan Pak Gusman. Setelah itu Bu Risa ya.
Oke, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Perkenalkan saya Pak Gusman Yuhardi dari pendamping Forum Anak Kecamatan Bengkalis, Kabupaten Bengkalis, Riau, Bu.
Ya.
Nah, dalam hal ini yang akan saya tanyakan adalah kita mengetahui bahwasanya sosial kontrol yang terbawah itu adalah pada lingkungan sekolah yang bisa melihat anak itu langsung yang mendapat suatu kekerasan dari digital. Nah, sekolah merupakan suatu lingkungan yang ada di seluruh Indonesia dan bisa melihat kondisi anak mungkin lebih dari 90% anak-anak yang ada di Indonesia, karena anak-anak sudah bersekolah. Nah, pertanyaan saya adalah bagaimana cara untuk meningkatkan peran pendidik dalam rangka mencegah kekerasan dan eksploitasi sosial dalam lingkungan digital. Jadi bagaimana pemerintahan pemberdayaan anak ini bisa berkolaborasi dengan sekolah agar kami di bawah-bawah ini bisa mengontrol. Itu aja, terima kasih.
Ya, mungkin deteksi dini gitu ya Pak Gusman ya.
Ya.
Iya, terima kasih Pak Gusman. Silakan Ibu Risa. Ini juga dari sekolah ya, Ibu guru. Jadi mungkin konsennya sama. Silakan Ibu Risa.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang.
Waalaikumsalam.
Baik, sebelum bertanya, saya ingin share ideas ya. Jadi dari sudut pandang saya sebagai seorang pengajar pendidik dan juga saya aktif juga dalam kegiatan organisasi kemasyarakatan dalam hal ini Fatayat NU begitu. Dan kami memang karena Fatayat NU sendiri adalah organisasi berbasis perempuan, jadi kami cukup concern terhadap isu-isu perempuan dan juga anak-anak ya, khususnya perempuan. Baik, untuk yang ingin saya share di sini adalah tadi melanjutkan diskusi bahwa ada daripada kita berkutat pada
Batasan.
mengizinkan atau tidak mengizinkan atau melarang penggunaan internet atau media sosial pada anak. Saya ingin menekankan bahwa betul sekali perilaku anak-anak dalam kehidupan ini ya, apapun itu, baik dari secara fisik maupun di dunia online, itu sangat dipengaruhi oleh perilaku orang tuanya juga. Nah, jadi saya ingin menekankan bahwa ketika ditanya mana sih sudut pandang, angle atau peran yang paling penting, saya ingin menggarisbawahi dalam hal ini adalah peran orang tua dan sekolah atau guru. Kenapa? Karena ketika anak di zaman sekarang ini sebagai digital native, mereka lahir sudah di masa era digital. Nah, jadi yang perlu kita sampaikan kepada anak-anak ketika mereka sudah mungkin memasuki usia balita atau anak-anak ya, bahkan apalagi ketika remaja, yang perlu kita tanamkan kepada anak-anak adalah internet untuk belajar. Internet adalah untuk belajar, begitu. Jadi
Ya.
ketika orang tua sudah menanamkan bahwa internet itu adalah untuk belajar, orang tua juga menunjukkan bagaimana cara menggunakan internet ini untuk belajar. Kemudian orang tua juga sebisa mungkin menunjukkan perilaku mereka ketika mereka terlihat oleh anak sedang menggunakan internet, mungkin yang harus mereka kontrol adalah mereka menggunakan internet untuk mengakses informasi, untuk
Ya.
mengakses berita, untuk melakukan webinar, untuk mencari seperti misalkan kalau guru sumber-sumber pengajaran, metode-metode pengajaran yang terkini dan sebagainya. Jadi
Ya.
yang harus dipromosikan ada parents should promote how to use the internet in very early age of their children like that. I want to stress it. Jadi
Ya.
ini yang harus kita pahami bersama.
Iya.
Ketika
Terima
anak
kasih ya
kita
Bu Risa. Soalnya
Iya.
waktunya terbatas Bu Risa. Jadi
Ya, jadi
intinya untuk orang tua itu digital parentingnya menjadi role model ya bagi anak.
betul, role model
Ya.
dulu untuk anak
Ya.
dan anak ditekankan bahwa internet itu untuk belajar.
Iya.
Dan sedikit lagi poin saya adalah ketika anak itu belum memasuki usia remaja, saya dengan lantang mengatakan bahwa anak tidak perlu dikenalkan kepada sosial media.
Oke.
Jika internet itu perlu, tidak perlu kita harus
Tapi tidak.
menghilangkannya 100%, tapi tadi untuk belajar dan
Ya.
harus
Terima kasih Bu
dicontohkan
Risa.
bagaimana penggunaan. Terima kasih, mohon
Mohon
maaf.
maaf ya Bu, waktunya terbatas.
Ya.
Selanjutnya Pak Fadri Asar dari Direktorat apa ya ini? Nggak kebaca Pak, maaf.
Ya,
Boleh perkenalan Pak
saya
Fadri?
oke Mbak Ciput, kita ketemu lagi ya.
Iya.
Karena kemarin di di pelatihan ini perundungan juga kita ketemu tapi Mbak
Oh
Ciput
iya, baru ingat.
sebagai itu narasumber, saya sebagai peserta ketika itu.
Silakan Pak Fadri.
Oh ya, oke. Saya dari Direktorat Pesantren Kementerian Agama RI. Saya juga ada di Satgas Pesantren Ramah Anak. Terus di bidang saya juga menangani pesantren ramah anak ya.
Ya.
Ada beberapa hal sebenarnya, ada dua saja, singkat saja. Bagaimana melindungi anak, entah itu sebagai korban ataupun ini pelaku, tanpa menghakimi anak ataupun mengasihani anak. Ini terkesan kasihan dengan anak. Itu sih yang ini pertama. Yang ini kedua, bagaimana menangani justifikasi open minded dalam ini kebebasan bermedsos, padahal di saat yang sama juga kita ingin itu mengontrol medsos bagi anak ataupun itu remaja. Ini saya kira seperti itu, singkat, padat dan
Terima
jelas.
kasih Pak Fadri untuk pertanyaan singkatnya. Ini kemudian mohon maaf ini yang Ibu Ilike atau apa ya? Saya maaf bacanya dari Direktorat SMP. Silakan Ibu Like ya, mungkin. Silakan di unmute Bu.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Cikut untuk kesempatannya. Izin Ibu Karen and Karen, saya dengan Elike dari Direktorat SMP Kemendikbudrismen. Jadi tadi menarik sekali apa yang disampaikan oleh Ibu Duo Karen terkait dengan apa learning session terkait dengan penanganan dan pencegahan untuk eksploitasi anak di ranah daring. Jadi ada beberapa hal mungkin yang ingin saya tanyakan dan juga sampaikan. Yang pertama terkait dengan pelaku sexual abuse. Ya, pelaku sexual abuse ini kan kalau dilihat ini kan untuk pelakunya itu kan mereka kan biasanya terorganisasi ya, masuk ke dalam kelompok-kelompok di dalam website gelap gitu ya. Nah, ini yang baru-baru terjadi ini terkait dengan sexual abuse yang dilakukan oleh bagaimana kalau sexual abuse dilakukan oleh aparat penegak hukum. Aparat penegak hukum ini kan baru saja terjadi di Indonesia ya, Bu Ciput beritanya nih.
Ya.
Itu yang pertama. Jadi mungkin untuk hal ini perlu disampaikan pada saat sosialisasi perlu disampaikan kepada anak-anak kita bahwa pelaku untuk kekerasan seksual di ranah daring ini bukan hanya orang asing atau orang jahat, tapi bisa saja ini orang-orang terdekat kita atau mungkin orang yang kita sangka baik. Itu yang pertama. Lalu yang kedua terkait dengan kalau tidak salah tadi sempat disampaikan kalau saya tidak salah tangkap ya Bu Ciput ya untuk criminalization of OCSEA tadi sempat disampaikan kalau saya tidak salah tangkap bahwa untuk anak-anak tidak boleh disalahkan bila mereka membagi konten yang sifatnya seksual bila itu dipergunakan untuk kebutuhan pribadi. Ya, gitu ya kalau saya tidak salah tangkap. Nah, mungkin juga perlu disampaikan untuk mencegah terjadinya untuk konten-konten yang telah disebar itu sampai ke ranah luas umum, mungkin perlu disampaikan bahwa mereka perlu bermedia sosial secara aman. Jadi mungkin juga perlu disampaikan bahwa yang pertama daripada mereka mengunggah foto-foto yang sifatnya menjurus ke konten-konten seksual, lebih baik mereka menggunakan internet untuk hal-hal yang bisa meningkatkan kapasitas mereka sebagai peserta didik. Mungkin seperti itu. Lalu yang ketiga terkait dengan penanganan sudah banyak sekali penanganan dilihat dari praktik-praktik baik yang ada di berbagai negara nih. Yang ingin saya tanyakan selain penanganan-penanganan dan pencegahan-pencegahan yang sudah ada, apakah ada efek jerah yang sudah dilakukan yang benar-benar efektif untuk bisa mencegah agar tidak terjadi lagi kasus-kasus serupa yang bisa terjadi ke anak-anak kita. Mungkin seperti itu. Terima kasih Bu Ciput.
Terima kasih Bu Elike. Selanjutnya Ibu Anggia dari Direktorat SD dan setelah itu Ibu Uni Rianti ya.
Ya, selamat siang, Ibu Ciput
Siap.
dan Miss Karen. Terima kasih untuk kesempatannya. Saya diperbolehkan untuk bertanya. eh saya mungkin lebih kepada terkait dengan narasi, karena kan pembahasan kita terkait dengan kekerasan seksual ya, ataupun mungkin kekerasan-kekerasan lain yang terjadi di sekolah. Nah, saya berbicara di lingkungan Kementerian Pendidikan. Saya secara pribadi ingin bertanya, eh, pada saat nanti kita mensosialisasikan atau memberitahukan terkait dengan kekerasan seksual ini kepada guru, murid, ataupun orang tua murid, itu sebaiknya narasinya apakah baiknya menggunakan narasi yang lebih positif? Seperti karena pada saat pembicaraan seperti ini kan narasinya lebih ke arah negatif ya, apa kekerasan seperti
Ram
itu.
gitu ya
Nah,
Bu.
ya, kayaknya ada penuh ketakutan gitu. Apakah sebaiknya hal seperti ini disampaikan secara gamblang dan to the point, atau ada narasi yang lebih positif, misalkan untuk sekolah yang aman, untuk penggunaan internet sehat, seperti itu. Apakah penggunaan narasi yang berbeda ini ada positif dan negatifnya, ada plus minusnya kah atau baiknya seperti apa saat kita menyampaikan hal ini di lingkungan pendidikan atau di lingkungan sekolah mungkin yang lebih kecil. Mungkin itu saja
Ya,
pertanyaan dari saya.
terima
Terima
kasih
kasih.
Bu Anggia. Bu Rianti, silahkan.
Oke, terima kasih. Selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya
I
dari
think if we can
kampus
possibly just have a chance to answer some of those questions, because our brains are going to explode.
Takut lupa ya kayaknya.
Okay.
One of
Oke,
one of
Bu
the
Rianti
first
boleh
questions
ya?
was the
Sebentar ya.
about teachers
Ya, oke.
and their role in protecting children. The OCSEA program that is already in place is directed towards educators, and it's working very well. From all the interviews that we've done, the children are learning a lot from the teachers, because we spoke to the children who'd received the training and they're passing it on, and they've got the message. So that is a clear good practice that should obviously be disseminated into all provinces. Just one thing I'd like to add about the teachers. The education on OCSEA has focused very much on online, on OCSEA, but OCSEA is a lot wider because it's an abuse of children. So we also need teachers to understand trauma and trauma impact and how it affects children's behavior, so that they can detect what are the signs. Where do we have a problem? Why is this child behaving in this particular way? Knowing that this could be linked to something. And that's where there is a bit of a gap in terms of providing teachers with the necessary knowledge to be able to identify abuse, which is not different from offline abuse as well. And the way children behave, why children are not attending school, why children become aggressive, all of those kinds of issues, why children are cutting themselves. There's reasons why they do it. So teachers need that kind of knowledge, and it relates both, as I said, to offline and online abuse, because your teachers are the perfect position to identify whether children are being abused.
And then that would probably also answer how to improve the empathy of the service providers who are offering the services, which was the one question that followed that. How do we protect children without stigmatizing them and victim blaming them? And we have seen that the only way to do that is actually through paradigm shifting. So, I can tell a police officer, this is how you investigate a case of OCSEA. But unless we train him on why children do online risk-taking, unless we train him on the trauma impact and the behavior impact of those children, you're going to still have a disconnect between the police officer and the victim. So always, building empathy requires understanding what you are, the person you're working with. And that understanding is broader than just the criminal concept of it. So it's understanding the child, it's understanding child development, it's understanding trauma impact and the behavior that comes from that.
The other issue was mentioned about the fact that we should not criminalize children who have sent naked pictures privately. Yes, that is correct, because we don't want to make them offenders and create a bigger problem than we already have. But that does not mean that we're saying it's okay for them to send naked pictures. We still need to try and educate children that it is not in their best interest to do so. All children need boundaries. We're not saying that children have the right to the internet and online environment to do as they please. In the same way as offline. Offline, you wouldn't allow your child to take their clothes off in public and show themselves to people. So you're not going to allow them to do that online as well. So the boundaries are still there within families. All we're saying is that once these children make the mistake, because of their brain development, because they don't think, because they do stupid things, because they take risks, that we then criminalize them for that. So boundaries are very important, and that's something that needs to be integrated into parenting programs and children programs. That, you know, there are certain things you're allowed to do and certain things you're not allowed to do.
Absolutely.
And that's really quite important, I think, as well. So we mustn't get the idea that basically children are allowed to do as they please online. They're not. There are boundaries and there are rules as much as there are anywhere else.
And then somebody was talking about the fact that law, in a particular case, a police officer was the offender or perpetrator. And I mean, that's global. I mean, you know, we have people who put themselves into professions, they train and they become employed in professions that allow them access to children. We call them career perpetrators. So that's not an unusual thing. Again, it comes down to the programs that we offer the kids on how to it's not necessarily the profession that they need to be cautious of, but it's the way the person behaves. So we've got to explain to kids, we've got to give them clues on, okay, if this person starts to groom you, this is what grooming looks like. And if you start to feel like they're grooming you, this is when you need to go and ask somebody to help you. So it's not the person, it's not the profession. We've got to we know sex offenders exist in every area of life. They are from teachers to people who are in religious positions, to people who preside over trials that involve sexual offenses. They become judges so that they can hear this stuff. So it's not about the who, it's about the how they operate, and giving children the techniques to recognize when the situation is becoming dangerous.
And the last question was about the narrative. I agree, a very good question, and I agree. This is a positive message. We can't be doing the demonizing of the internet and everybody that's there and making it a terrifying place for kids, because having spoken to the kids, they regard it as a safe space where they have friends, talk to family, and are entertained. It's a very positive place, and I think that's the message that we give them, except that there are dangers. And our children need to be given and empowered to deal with those dangers. And in doing the empowerment as well, I think, personally, my opinion is that we need to be more realistic with children, because we need to say to them in programs, yes, we know that you're chatting to your boyfriend. We know what you're saying, but just think about it. Okay, if he then shares that message, how are you going to feel? Finding ways for kids to be able to share that information in a way that's safe. So saying, it's not a good idea to send him a picture. How else can you do this in a safe way? Because if somebody finds it, these are the ramifications. And we get kids to explore those ramifications. What would you do if your boyfriend sent your picture to everybody? How would you deal with it? So how can we protect ourselves? And those are the issues that we need to deal with our adolescents. Is, you know, not that this is a negative space, but yeah, sure, there's negative issues in the same as offline, but how do we protect ourselves? And our kids are intelligent enough to know that there are dangers if we give them the right information.
I think that one of the biggest tasks that we have ahead of us is understanding that the topics of communication that parents now have to, the topics of discussion that parents now have to have with children are pretty much everything. I mean, if I look at, and I'm 52 years old, but when I was growing up, things like talking about sex with my parents, it was not accepted. It was not possible. That was something I was really, really fascinated by in the week that we've been here talking to the parents, and how comfortable people look when talking about this issue, which makes me feel very happy. Because, and I mean, I have two beautiful daughters who are 13 and nearly 12 years old. And I've realized that there is, unfortunately, now no longer that you're too young to talk about it. I'll talk to you about it when you're older. We can't do that anymore. So we're going to have to dig deep as parents. And I know that it's really hard for me, and I do this for a living. So if it's hard for me, I can imagine how hard it is for most parents to know that you're actually just going to have these conversations now.
But the positive thing that we picked up in the last week was, because of all your other programs, a lot of the children were very open. We were having conversations with boys in the children's forum about menstruation and hygiene. They were quite happy to discuss the topics without any kind of suggestion that they were not appropriate topics. So I think, you know, the family environment in Indonesia is very capable of doing this without any big real issue, compared to many other countries in the world where this is going to be a really difficult task to overcome.
I mean, I know in Africa, for example, we're nowhere near where Indonesia is in terms of parent-child communication. It's not there.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, when we were training judges in Africa, we were told that we weren't really allowed to discuss, as women, we weren't really allowed to discuss sex with the men who are older than us. So Indonesia is in a good space.
Dan terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Ini saya izin tinggal satu saja, Ibu Rianti, karena tadi sudah sempat di on spot karena waktunya sudah tidak memungkinkan. 12.30 harus betul-betul kita akhiri pertemuan ini. Silakan Bu Rianti.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Cipo atas waktunya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat siang untuk semuanya. Saya berasal dari Universitas Pendidikan Muhammadiyah Sorong. Jadi kami background-nya di bidang pendidikan. Jadi kami, saya di Kemitraan Muda UNICEF yang di sini kita mendidik calon-calon guru. Yang ingin saya tanyakan, pembelajaran muatan pendidikan yang seefektif apa agar bisa mencegah eksploitasi sosial. Bahkan kami pun sendiri bermuatan inklusi, tapi kami sendiri belum begitu benar-benar memahami seperti apa itu pendidikan yang inklusi terkait yang disabilitas itu, yang ramah disabilitas. Jangankan untuk yang disabilitas ya, yang untuk kami yang mohon maaf, yang minta maaf, yang non disabilitas saja masih mengalami kendala. Kami ingin terus apakah muatan-muatan aturan agama itu bisa diinkludkan di situ, karena kita di Indonesia kalau dibilang tentang agama masihlah kita tuh mengerti gitu. Mungkin seperti itu aja karena waktunya. Terima kasih sekali sudah diberikan waktu untuk berbicara. Oke.
Terima kasih Bu Rianti. Waalaikumsalam sudah berikan pertanyaan singkat. Silakan Karen.
It's a short question, but it's a difficult answer.
What I think is really good is what you guys are already doing in the programs we've seen, because the music, as we mentioned earlier, the music, the jingles, in some of
videos,
some of the schools we visited, they've made comics, you know, all of those kinds of things that are child friendly, that children love, have become part of the programs. And I think that's why those programs are so effective and why they're being replicated again and again. You know, the children know the songs, they know the icons, it's become cool, the whole program has. So it's, and I think the reason why it's been so successful is because you have got the children to help in the development of the materials. And I think that is one of the very good practices, because it's the children who've made the videos, they've made the TikToks, they've made the songs, and they love it. So getting the children to make the material, I think, is the key. And that's what you guys have been doing, and that's why it's really, really working.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I was going to suggest as the answer, is that if you don't know how to include your kids with disabilities in these programs, ask them. Ask them how they would like to be included. Have that conversation.
Ya, terima kasih Karen. Menambahkan Bu Rianti dan juga Mbak Raudatul ya tadi yang menyampaikan concern terkait anak penyandang disabilitas. Praktek baik kemarin di Jawa Tengah, jadi di proses edukasi pelatihan terkait bahaya OCSEA dan bagaimana melakukan pencegahan serta penanganan. Kemudian kelompok anak-anak penyandang disabilitas ini mereka sepakat membentuk gabungan jadi semacam organisasi yang itu didampingi oleh orang tua dari anak juga, difasilitasi oleh orang tua, kumpulan dari orang tua anak-anak penyandang disabilitas. Mereka semuanya sepakat yang bergabung dalam satu kelompok ini untuk menjadi peer edukator bagi teman-teman sesama penyandang disabilitas dan mereka juga turut mereview modul-modul yang disusun supaya lebih ramah untuk anak penyandang disabilitas termasuk metode di penyampaiannya dalam pelatihan secara onsite itu seperti apa termasuk informasi bahwa mereka lebih mudah untuk mengetahui dengan lebih banyak gambar dibanding banyak tulisan gitu ya. Itu kan salah satu input buat mereka. Kemudian Bu Rianti mengenai aspek agama. Betul Bu, Indonesia ini tentu paling tertarik kalau yang berbicara itu adalah tokoh agama atau setidaknya minimal ustazanya menyampaikan gitu ya. Dan itu juga praktek baik di kelompok beberapa pesantren yang menjadi dampingan program OCSEA ini. Bahkan terciptalah sebuah solawat, Ibu. Solawat yang isi teksnya itu tentang pendidikan untuk internet aman bagi anak dan bagaimana juga peran orang tua. Jadi solawat yang dinyanyikan oleh anak-anak juga untuk ke sesama usia anak, kemudian solawat yang disampaikan oleh kelompok lansia dan orang tua, itu sasarannya juga untuk mengedukasi orang tua dan lansia, yaitu kakek nenek mereka. Jadi itu yang sangat menarik. Nanti kalau dokumentasi program OCSEA ini sudah selesai, Bu Astrid, mungkin kalau Bu Astrid masih ada dan juga Pak Jalu, tim dari HDPKAK, mungkin kita akan lakukan sekali lagi webinar untuk menyampaikan praktek-praktek baik itu supaya bisa diketahui lebih luas. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Sebagai closing, ada closing statement dari Ibu Karen and Karen. Silakan.
No.
No.
Jaga barang, absolutely.
Oke, ini tagar dari Jaga Bareng ini juga yang digunakan di Provinsi Jawa Tengah. Jadi pada saat mereka mempergunakan sign ini, semua yang sudah pernah mendapatkan edukasi akan tahu bahwa mereka concern untuk bersama-sama melindungi anak-anak dan juga teman-teman sebayanya di ranah daring dari bahaya OCSEA. Kalau yang nggak tahu bingung ini apa, nah itu kesempatan untuk menjelaskan. Itu bahasa-bahasa konsep-konsep yang digunakan. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu semua. Ucapan tentu terima kasih bagi Ibu Milen, Ibu Astrid, dan tim yang ada di UNICEF Indonesia yang sudah dengan sepenuh hati mengawal program OCSEA ini bersama dengan kami, Kemen PPPA, dan juga memfasilitasi segala input dan juga aspirasi yang disampaikan oleh semua pihak, baik di tingkat pusat, dari kementerian lembaga yang menjadi mitra, maupun teman-teman di daerah pilot di 3 provinsi. Kemudian juga untuk Ibu Karen dan Ibu Karen yang akan kembali ke Afrika Selatan, semoga perjalanannya menyenangkan, tidak mengalami berkali-kali delay seperti pada saat kedatangan, dan kembali ceria, bertemu dengan keluarga, dan melanjutkan menulis dengan kenang-kenangan bahwa arti nama kalian itu begitu unik di Indonesia pada saat digabungkan, dan maknanya tentu akan selalu kami ingat seumur hidup. Terima kasih semuanya. Mohon maaf kalau masih ada yang raise hand, tidak sempat bertanya. Nanti bisa kontak panitia untuk bisa menanyakan beberapa hal pertanyaan atau kebutuhan materi. Silahkan. Atau panitia ada pengumuman, saya kembalikan ke MC Dan saya pamit undur diri karena saya harus menghadiri meeting jam 12.30. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Ibu Ciput dan Ibu Karen dan Karen. Baiklah hadirin yang berbahagia, telah kita ikuti rangkaian acara learning session, pencegahan dan penanganan kekerasan dan eksploitasi seksual anak di lingkungan digital. Kami izin mengingatkan kepada Bapak Ibu yang belum mengisi absen untuk mengisi absen yang tertera pada kolom chat. Semoga dengan acara ini dapat menjadi motivasi bagi kita semua dalam memberikan perlindungan pada anak-anak Indonesia. Sebelumnya izinkan saya berpantun terlebih dahulu. Pergi ke pasar bersama Mama. Keliling-keliling mencari bantal.
Cakep.
Mari kita
Mari kita
satukan
satukan
asa
asa
bersama
bersama. Cakep.
mengawal penanganan
Mengawal penanganan
kekerasan dan
kekerasan dan
eksploitasi seksual
eksploitasi
anak
seksual
di
anak
lingkungan
di
digital.
lingkungan.
Baik,
Baik,
sebelum kita
sebelum kita
meninggalkan ruang
meninggalkan
seperti ini,
ruang ini,
mungkin kita bisa
mungkin kita
mengambil
bisa
foto
foto
bersama-sama terlebih
bersama-sama
dahulu.
terlebih dahulu.
Mungkin Bapak Ibu
Mungkin
boleh mengaktifkan kamera dan memberikan senyum terbaiknya. Kepada tim Mas Erik boleh dibantu. Baik, kita foto sekarang ya, izin Ibu Ciput dan Ibu Karen dan Karen. 1, 2, 3. Mungkin ada gaya yang harus disamain, Ibu. Gini ya. Baik, kita foto bersama-sama lagi. 1, 2, 3.
Orang.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Bapak dan Ibu dan semua partisipan. Antusiasnya sangat baik sekali ya hari ini. Untuk itu berakhirlah sudah rangkaian acara pada hari ini.
Terima kasih.
Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom.
Waalaikumsalam
Satu.
warahmatullahi
Terima kasih
wabarakatuh. Sampai jumpa.
Mbak Dalia. Selamat
Dalia,
siang.
Kakak Dalia Risma.
Terima kasih.
Dan nilainya
Dan untuk link materi tersedia di kolom chat ya Bapak Ibu.
Mana nontonnya?
Ada link materi.
Boleh minta sambutannya Pak?
Rader ada Kak? Halo? Rader ada?
Nanti dimasukkan ke dalam link juga untuk sambutannya.
Nilainya 3 dikalikan 2. Pengalian 2-nya itu ada di aplikasi. Jadi ditulis nilai.
Nggak bisa.